Hello everyone, Michael here for Tactica Imperialis. Welcome to today's video. Today it's going to be another Warhammer 40,000 theory relating to a comment on our previous one, which you can check out in the theory playlist in the description. In a way, this theory is the inverse of the last. The question comes from Sasinator, Lord of Sasins, or Sassinator, Lord of Sassins. Don't really know. In response to our debate on the redemption of the traitor Primarchs, they want to know about the possibility of the Loyalist Primarchs becoming corrupted and falling to chaos. As before, we'll be looking at all 9 Loyalists, alive, dead, or MIA, and we also need to establish a couple of conditions just like last time. 1. The previous enmities between the traitors and Loyalists can be put aside just so as the newly corrupted Primarch isn't killed by one of the old ones, e.g. Russ and Magnus, Dawn and Perturabo, the list goes on. 2. If the Primarch does fall, their entire legion does not necessarily have to fall with them. We can assume, maybe, that their direct descendants in the chapter that bears their legion's name will go, but it's not guaranteed that every successor will go with them. 3. If a Primarch falls into the thrall of a particular Chaos God, there will be no major hostility between the original traitor following the same god and the new one. Primarily, I'm looking at you, Angron. With all that said, and possibly a few too many conditions in place as extra insurance, let's go and corrupt ourselves some Primarch, shall we? Let's start off with probably the least likely Primarch to fall to the predations of Chaos. For me, that is Rogel Dawn. Dawn was unwaveringly loyal to the Emperor, and extremely humble at the same time. He sought no personal glory, no favour with his father, no manipulation of the truth. If anything, he was too honest for his own good, which is why Perturabo was so damn mad at him. On top of that, the darkest hour for Dawn, the best shot for Chaos to get at him, has now probably passed. He saw the death of the Emperor as his fault, and in a pain-induced vision through some weird torture device, he decided to cleanse himself and his legion in the fires of war. This led to the Iron Cage incident that, whilst extremely costly to his legion, actually helped Dawn reassemble the fists into the chapters of Guilliman's Codex Astartes by taking out the most righteous, we don't want to get split up-y ones. It also showed him that his resolve was probably greater than Perturabo's, for the Lord of Iron and almost his entire legion would have had to die in order to wipe out Dawn and his kin. With his failure forgiven, at least in his own mind, I don't think Dawn has any chance of falling to chaos, though if he did, at least he'd have the decency to tell everybody first. Next up, we have Jagtai Khan of the White Scars. Honestly, there's not a lot of story on this guy, but from what we know, I can safely say he was a very low risk of falling to chaos. Quite frankly, he was flat out offered a place in the traitor legions by Mortarion on Prospera, and he in turn flat out refused. Also, like Dawn, Khan was extremely loyal to the Emperor. He never questioned his role or challenged Horus's appointment as War Master, and while he was pro-Psyker, he complied with the decree at Nicaea. Makes me wonder if he could have changed the result at Nicaea by speaking up a bit better with Magnus. He was also not the ruling type. After conquering his homeworld Chagoris, or Mundus Planus, he simply left the populace to their own devices rather than manipulate and control them. He was possibly misguided, however. He believed the Emperor had done no wrong to the Primarchs at the time of the heresy. Clearly he never met Angron, and so the thought of betrayal never even crossed his mind. So, don't worry White Scars fans, the Khan is staying loyal. At this point, I'm going to cover 2 Primarchs who aren't necessarily going to be corrupted, but they may end up, as I'm going to call it, doing a Magnus, and getting wrapped up with chaos whilst having noble intentions. They are Ferrus Manus and Sanguinius. Now I know, Sanguinius was supremely loyal to his father, his faith in the Emperor outweighing his closest heck friendship with Horus to the extent that he chose death in battle with the War Master when he was likely given the choice to serve, and he also knew he was going to die because he was slightly prescient or something. I'm not here to tell you that the angel was actually going to be corrupted by chaos at any point. What I am saying, however, is that Sanguinius was willing to sacrifice himself and be possessed by a flipping demon in order to cure the red thirst that was already beginning to afflict his legion. Given the damage the red thirst can still cause today, and add it to the death sentence that is the Black Rage, and you see why Sanguinius could have ended up accidentally serving chaos as a means to save his sons. And while it is generally accepted that the Black Rage originates from his death, the first instance of it was in fact before Terror, when Sanguinius was grievously wounded by a bloodthirster on Cygnus Prime, which, for the record, is also the planet on which he almost got possessed. Thus, Sanguinius betraying the Emperor may be impossible to envision, but a self-sacrifice to save the Blood Angels may not be out of the question, even if it meant serving chaos by mistake. A similar argument can be made for Ferrus Manus. While it's now commonplace for the Iron Hands to replace their bodies with metal in mimicry of the Primarchs' own arms, which had been coated with what is theorised to be Necron living metal, it was a habit Manus was desperate for his sons to kick. In fact, if the heresy had not taken place, he planned to fix his own arms and wean his legion off the whole "the flesh is weak" nonsense at the end of the Great Crusade. So as before, is it so hard to believe that in order to achieve this, having exhausted all other avenues of persuasion and experimentation, the Gorgon would accidentally consort with the Ruinous Powers? This is particularly true for his own body. Living metal is barely understood by the Imperium at the best of times, so it may be that only the Chaos Gods could actually cure him and get it off his arms. Plus, just like Perturabo, he was known for being rather good at brutal genocides, though not in his homeworld, of course. It is a stretch, especially given how his best friend Vulgrim personally tried to turn him and failed, but as with Sanguinius, it would be accidental if he fell to chaos, not deliberate, so higher risk, but for all the right reasons, if that makes any sense. Now we move on to two darker Primarchs, Corvus Corax and Lionel Johnson. I know that most people expect Lion to be the most dirty traitor of them all, but honestly, he's pretty damn safe as a Loyalist. The Dark Angels themselves are shady as heck, but they did that mainly after Johnson disappeared following the battle on Caliban, not because he commanded it, and debatably because he encouraged it. He was a bit shady, but hey. And just like Manus, one of the traitors did approach Johnson in order to win him over to the traitor's cause. In this case, it was Conrad Kurz. Lion refused, the two came to blows, and this possibly actually held up the Dark Angels, leaving them the wrong side of Erebus' ruin storm and thus late to terror. The main way in my eyes that Johnson could have been corrupted is through the warp storm that engulfed Caliban following Luther's defeat. Johnson was taken away by the Watchers in the dark into the heart of the rock, but it is likely he was caught in said storm for at least some period of time. Add that to the fact that he'd been waiting for his alarm clock to go off for 10 millennia, so perhaps he's been dreaming and been corrupted through said dreams like Horus was on Davin, and it is said that he was rather secretive even during the Great Crusade, at least according to Guilliman, but I doubt it, somehow. Sorry folks, the Lion isn't a dirty heretic in my opinion. As for Corax, he probably saved his legion from going rogue almost by accident. During a battle known as the Battle of Gate 42, the still loyal Horus commanded the Raven Guard to assault the bastion that was absolutely bristling with defences. Corax initially refused to do it the way Horus wanted to, but was eventually calmed and talked around by Leman Russ. The battle was extremely costly for the 19th Legion, their second worst engagement behind the infamous drop site massacre. But by sending the Terran companies of the Raven Guard to lead the assault, who were more inclined to follow Horus's plan, Corax inadvertently wiped out the warrior lodges hidden within the Legion, which meant that the spread of chaos never came to the Raven Guard. There is some risk for the Raven Lord, however. Following the Alpha Legion's sabotage of Corax's project to rebuild his Legion, and after the heresy, Corax retreated to his tower alone to pray for the Emperor's mercy for his ginormous cock-up. We don't know what happened, but a year later he comes out of the Raven Spire and he heads straight for the Eye of Terror, leaving behind one little message: nevermore. What did he learn or see during his isolation? No one knows save Corax, but it's not impossible to think that his mental instability, debatably, left him at risk, and his choice of destination could be seen as martyrdom, going to try and find a cure for some majig, or perhaps joining up with the traitors. And he has been in the Eye for about 10,000 years now, which is almost certain to have adversely affected him if he went in not perfectly of sound mind. His betrayal is still unlikely, but it's certainly far from impossible. 6 Primarchs down, 3 to go. Leman Russ, Vulcan, and Robbie Guilliman. Let's go with Vulcan first. Honestly, I don't think we have anything to worry about with this one. Vulcan was absolutely broken by Conrad Kurz following Istvan V, and this would have been his time of greatest weakness, at least in my opinion. Yet he never gave up, never lost his resolve, and was eventually able to break free from Night Haunter, at the cost of his sanity, unfortunately. He died permanently soon after, at least until his final resurrection on Nocturne and the seeming loss of his perpetuality. But after that, his path is kind of unknown, because there's conflicting evidence as concerns his activities and then his final departure. I think that Vulcan is a safe bet as a Loyalist, even with deciding to just bugger off on the reasoning of tempering the salamanders. I just don't see any evidence for him going rogue at all. Our penultimate Primarch is Guilliman of the Ultramarines. Like Johnson, I would wager there's people hoping I could denounce the Lord of Ultramar as a dirty heretic. But it's really difficult to pin anything on Guilliman. Seriously, the guy was basically perfect in every way. Well, almost. We do have the rather incriminating guillotine of Imperium Secundus lurking in the background. With Ultramar on the eastern side of the galaxy cut off from terror by the Ruin Storm, Guilliman established a second Imperium as a way to keep his father's dream alive, whilst not actually knowing if Horus has won. This all sounds very heretical, but note that Guilliman flat out refused leadership of Imperium Secundus, not wanting to follow Horus in creating a new empire just to rule over it. Instead, he asked first Johnson, then Sanguinius to lead. Obviously, the project was then abandoned as the Ruin Storm faded and the main Imperium proved to still be standing. Though why only Sanguinius made it to Terra in time while the others did not is slightly confusing, at least to me. Regardless, Guilliman's actions post-heresy reflect the same idea as Imperium Secundus. His legion was the largest, by a country mile, I believe, and so he could have taken control of the Imperium, but he didn't. Instead, he divided his power massively through the Codex Astartes, deciding that no one man could have control of an army of that size again. So while Papa Smurf looks shady on paper, honestly, I just don't think he could cut it as a traitor. He lacks the mindset required to fight for glory, and for domination of the galaxy in general. Honestly, he just isn't cut out for it. We conclude with Leman Russ. Funny how the Primarch I consider the highest risk of a fall is the counterpart of the one most likely to be redeemed, though that is entirely coincidental, I assure you. So why is Russ the big risk? After all, he was ever loyal to the Emperor, going so far as to wipe out at least one legion, and possibly even 3 if you believe the stories of the lost legions. The legends say his quest has taken him in search of the cure for the Emperor, or that he's been hidden amongst the Imperious populace the entire time protecting it from chaos. But most stories say he's in the Eye of Terror. The recovery of Russ's armour from a world on the edge of the eye supports this. It is found in a place called the Temple of Horus, make of that what you will. The Eye itself is a maddening place, enough to change even those who believe themselves the most loyal and exacting Astartes, such as the Crimson Sabres before they became the Crimson Slaughter. And Russ has supposedly been there, charging around killing stuff for a little over 10,000 years. Plus, just like the Blood Angels, the Space Wolves are flawed in their gene seed, though in this case it manifests as the Wolfen. Especially since the 13th Company who travel with Russ appear to be all Wolfen now, at least as far as their reappearance is anything to go on. Maybe Russ engaged in some kind of bargain in the same way as Manus or Sanguinius would, in order to halt any further mutation amongst his sons beyond their already borderline feral state, or to keep himself from degenerating in the same way. Again, it would be corruption for a noble cause, but corruption nonetheless. I also want to draw a quick parallel with Mortarion. Russ looked down on those who practiced psychic powers, seeing them as dishonourable. Doesn't appear he regarded the Emperor as a hypocrite, but worth noting. Perhaps like Mortarion, he was tricked into a position where he had to embrace the warp in order to survive. Who knows? I will say that the chance of Russ falling is still very, 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 very unlikely, but of everyone we've looked at today, I believe he is the most susceptible, along with Corax. And there we go. The 9 Primarchs who stayed true to the Emperor have had their chances of a fall to chaos reviewed. How do they fare? Well, we have 3 who are definitely going absolutely nowhere: Rogel Dorn, Jagtai Khan, and Vulcan. Lionel Johnson and Robert Guilliman are also very low risk, but there's an outside chance that will put them in the next category up, even though it's basically 0. Sanguinius and Manus are safe from corruption by chaos, but I do believe they'd be at risk of an accidental fall to chaos in trying to save their brothers or themselves, so they sit in some kind of middle tier. Corax and Russ are the highest risk of the 9, but bear in mind that the chance of a fall is still very low in the grand scheme of things and compared to the average Astartes. Russ falls at number 1 and Corax a close second, though arguably we could switch that order if we knew what happened in the Ravenspire. Of course, this is just my opinion, and I'm sure you have your own thoughts. After all, I've called out Sanguinius and given Johnson and Guilliman a free pass. So feel free to let me know what you think on the topic and ask any questions you'd like to see me tackle in a future theory video in the comments below. And with that, it's time to end. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Michael for Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Bye for now.